Okay, good morning, everybody. This is going to be a highly dynamic and interactive session, isn't it, Adam?
Yeah, but there's no fire.
There's no fire, unfortunately, so false advertising. I have a few questions I'm going to ask Adam, but if the audience has questions, can I ask you just to stick your hand up when you're ready to ask the question? So we'll try and make this as interactive as we possibly can. But otherwise, I've got lots of things to ask you, Adam. Now, Adam, the first question I want to ask you, while we're waiting for the audience to get their breath, is can you give an overview of Mining 2030 and what it is and what it's trying to achieve?
Well, the Global Investor Commission on Mining 2030 went public last week with our supporters, which are 83 investors that have come together to support the need, representing 11 trillion in assets under management. Really recognising that we need, as investors, to think differently about the mining sector and the way that we invest into it. And so to do that and to aid us in understanding how we can achieve that and really support the sector in the kind of growth and its future evolution, that we needed a vehicle to bring together the best minds from different stakeholder groups, from industry, from civil society, from academia, to really enable us to have the opportunity to draw from that, and then I believe to really bring the wider investor community together to understanding the future of this sector. And 2030 is because we wanted to really look to the future and think, well, okay, it's not that far away, 2030, but it's just far away enough that I think we could think and challenge ourselves differently, because I think if we repeat the way that we've been engaging, investing, stewarding this sector as we have over the past decades, it is not going to perform the role that society needs this sector to do.
And why now, Adam?
Well, we're at a crucial moment. You've got, and I think all the panels in this conference have been clear that there's enormous demand for what mining produces, particularly for the low carbon transition, but also for many other things society requires. But at the same time, you've also got part of the industry that is going to be declining over time. And there's a challenge for investors in terms of how do we enable the sector to be the best it can be? How do we ensure that the concerns that many have around the sector can be addressed? I think when you look at your average sort of pension fund, which ultimately are many of the ultimate owners of the sector or investors into it, it's underweighted. I look at our pension fund. Our investments in this sector are underweighted in comparison to others, and many of the instruments we use and invest through automatically do that because of the challenges within the sector. And we can't carry on doing it like that. And I think we've got to rethink the way that we invest, the way we understand what's needed, and the kind of expectations we should be having, but also aligning with colleagues in the insurance and the banking sector, because there is an opportunity for this to be done differently. There is an opportunity to extend horizons. I think the short-termism that sometimes investment interjects into this sector works against the fact that this is a multi-decadal industry. And really we need an opportunity now at this point to take that step back, have that reflection, but to do it in a timely way and then really come back with a strategy to try and do something different.
So Adam, okay, so the case is clear. I can see why investors might support this. I can see clearly the reason why the industry should be fully engaged with this. But haven't we been here for? Is this actually going to work? Is there any evidence you can advance that this is not just going to be another initiative that then falls over in 6 months or a year's time?
Well, I think a lot of investors have been walking through a process in relation to the work on tailings. That I suspect is familiar to many of you, but out of an incident that obviously was hugely impactful, and that event, I think, catalysed an insight from investors that we need to be really engaging with the sector very differently. And from that experience, we've been able to work with industry, with other stakeholders to understand how do we deal with this issue that's a cross-sector issue. It's a systemic challenge to the whole sector. Whether you're the best practicing company on standards related to that issue, you are impacted by the fact that society, investors, others really felt that this issue was not being managed well, and therefore we need to do something differently. So through the work on developing a global standard with ICMM, with the UN, with other stakeholders, we've been able to define what good practice is. We've also been able to define how we can use disclosure to understand the role that we have in the companies that we're invested and our expectations. And then we've now seen that standard being actually implemented by companies. And I do pay credit to the fact that you had a leadership group of companies that adopted that standard, said, right, we're going to operate to it. It's been very difficult for a lot of them. It's an exacting standard. It's required some real challenging evolution in the way companies have approached it. We've been hearing from the companies what that's entailed, how it's basically preventing siloed thinking, and it's meant that there's much more of a holistic approach across the whole business to that issue. And it's meant that boards are absolutely engaged on this issue. I don't believe there's a company with tailings dam whose board is not now engaged in a very different way than they were prior to this 4.5 years ago. And so you are seeing change, you are seeing evidence of a standard developed through that multi-stakeholder process coming into life. It is a journey, it's still going to take time, but that is now, with the disclosure that came in August, a very significant step. Now it needs to roll through the rest of the industry, but you're also now seeing governments integrating that standard into their regulations. So in terms of a theory of change here, you've got a collaborative process that wasn't easy, wasn't always not in challenging moments, working through defining that best practice, voluntary company adoption of that, reinforcement and support of that from investors, from banks and insurers, and now you're seeing regulators starting to pick up and reinforcing it, and you're seeing change. And as I say, it's still going to take time. There's another piece of the puzzle to bring in terms of the independent institute that can ensure that this standard is applied and interpreted in the way it needs to be and knowledge is shared. But my sense is that we've got a model there that can also be applied in other areas. And so some of the efforts I'm seeing in terms of consolidation on standards are really welcome. And can we, as finance, play a much clearer role in supporting the industry, in aligning behind what the best practice standards are, and really playing our part in ensuring that the whole industry changes, not just a group of companies.
Okay, so I think it's clear from what you said, Adam, is that this, the Global Investor Commission has a high potential of defining and shaping the industry and being effective in implementation. What are the immediate priorities for the Commission, or where does it need to focus first, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing is that there is a really important piece of knowledge and ensuring that the wider global investor community, beyond those that have probably been present on the panels here and at this conference, are really engaged with understanding the importance of mining. It has an oversized importance, and yet it's underweighted in our portfolio. Its relationship with our strategic goals as a pension fund and the transition plans of many other sectors is enormous and is absolutely critical. But yet, as I say, our actual approach to this sector is instinctively, through many of the instruments we're in, is to underweight it. And if we're going to change that, we need to bring a much broader audience of asset owners, pension funds around the world into an understanding as to the role that this industry has, the relationship it has with all the other sectors we're invested in, achieving societal goals, the challenges that are going to prevent it to meet the demand, and that goes from tailings through to all the other issues, be it water, biodiversity management, etc. And understanding where there are good practice standards. As I mentioned, there are efforts underway within industry to consolidate. There's the announcement a couple of days from ICMM with various standard bodies coming together. That's very welcome. But what is the role of the investor community, and I'll broach the wider finance community, to align behind that? What do we need to be able to do that effectively? And I think that will be a key pillar of the work that we do. But also understanding and rethinking the way we invest. Are we incentivising the right behaviours? Are we providing the security, the long-term capital for this sector to be able to do what it needs to do? And do we need to rethink that model? And I think some of the timeframes of our expectations and horizons, I think it's time to step back and rethink some of these things and challenge ourselves. And then lastly, I would venture that the relationship between extraction and conflict. We need to be absolutely honest that there is clearly examples where there has been extraction. It can create conflict if it's done poorly. It can fuel further conflict. And therefore, again, what is the role of investors supporting companies to be the best practitioners when they operate in communities, to really ensure that we can proactively support an approach that is not generating conflict, but actually enabling communities to flourish. And so I think that those are the pillars, that understanding pillar, bringing in a much broader audience of investors to really get this sector and what needs to happen, the challenging issues, where there's that alignment and that sort of consolidation from finance behind that good practice, and then the other issues like conflict, but also issues like artisanal mining. What is our approach to these? So ensuring that it is that whole array.
Okay. Adam, we've had an influx of young people. So can I ask you a question we haven't prepared? Mm-hmm. Because I think would be interesting for them. It's, we talk a lot about companies and institutions and systems and process. I'm quite interested in the role of people. I'm quite interested in, if you want to talk a little bit about sort of your personal motivations and how the role of individuals as champions within organisation can affect change. So from your work, what is the lesson that you would offer to others on how to set up or create change at the kind of scale you think can be catalysed through this kind of initiative?
Well, probably. I can do that usual thing that people on panels do. I've got 3 children, and well, not everyone has 3, but you're that internal critique at home kind of thing. But I do talk to my kids around what their careers are. Do they perceive mining as something that they might go into? Yeah. I sort of try and explain to them, my God, if you want to be in an industry that can genuinely change the world and do it in a way that advances it in a really good practice, this is a fascinating industry for you to consider. And I sort of have that discussion at home and get some traction, but not an enormous amount. But I do think that from my sort of, I get traction.
Teenagers.
But and Taylor Swift, quite frankly, is the top traction that I get when I have those conversations. My daughter was top 0.5% on Taylor Swift supporters or something, which she was delighted about. And I'm trying to talk about mining and your future career, and I wasn't understanding 0.5 was a really good mark of achievement. But anyway, I just. One of the things is that the Commission, again, I think does need to look at is that future workforce in this sector. And one of the things I find most inspiring when I go and visit mines, I meet very young people coming into the industry, often in working down the mine, and I've seen there's this female drill team in a mine in South Africa, and it was fascinating. The moment I could break away from the formal bit and just chat with them, and they're all new into the industry, and they wanted to become the chief executive of the company. They had high aspirations as to how good the industry could be, and it's how can you see that flow of people coming in to meet the future workforce of that industry, and it's going to need a lot of outreach. There's a lot of education, but there's a lot of trust building, and there's a lot of sort of just understanding where this industry can play the role it can to enable societal goals to be achieved.
And the Taylor Swift analogy is quite relevant, because I think that in many ways, understanding that if we're going to deliver a low carbon economy that delivers for all of the people in the world, the poor and the vulnerable, is the great challenge of our time. And I think understanding how the mining industry can bring people in with that as the objective, not just to extract tons of ore or minerals, but actually mining and its contribution to sustainable development, I think is a really important message for the industry to embrace. Can I just check whether there are questions from the audience, either on Taylor Swift or anything else?
Oh, good grief, no.
Oh, good grief. Sorry, the gentleman here.
You say that the industry is underweight from an investment perspective, but for us to understand that, we need to know what your denominator is.
Okay. So just, yeah.
Assuming that the numerator in this case is the global mining market cap of mining companies, notwithstanding development or exploration companies, what is the juxtaposition of that so we can understand your underweight?
Yep.
Okay. So if I'll just repeat the question for the camera. So the question is, one, how do you measure over underweight? And I think the really interesting question is, what can this effort then contribute to altering that and making this sector one that investors, I guess, Adam, both want to be invested in and engaged with, because I think there are 2 strands to it.
Yeah. I think the previous panel you had a chap from Allianz Global Investors explaining from their perspective the way in which the sector's sort of underweight in comparison to others. From our perspective as a fund and many of the other pension funds we talk to, the filters that we have across a range of ESG criteria automatically really sort of underweight this sector because of the risk exposure on those factors. And I think that from our...
That is to say, you stay away new operating parameters
Yeah.
represents outsized risk.
Just repeat the point.
The other side of it would be cash flows are utterly extraordinary to match up the liabilities that you as a pension fund have.
Yep.
And you theoretically owe your fiduciary duty more to this than to that.
No, I mean, look, if you're invested in a sector where you have issues that lead to really, I mean, there's clear examples of major ESG events that make it very difficult when you look at it as sector-wide. There are clearly very good operators in the sector, and you can differentiate underneath that sort of sectoral perspective. But the challenge is that unless you are really understanding the sector and actually invested in doing so, it's very easy just to default to the sort of the collective filter view or whatever. And what I'm trying to suggest, and part of the reason, the rationale for the Commission is, we've all got to own an understanding of this sector. Because if we carry on doing it at the moment, we're just going to have sort of it being treated in the way that it currently is. There are clear upsides, but at the same time, that if we're going to sort of really play a very different role here, it's about being eyes open, recognising that there are a range of challenging issues within the sector, but that doesn't mean you run away. Actually, it means we double down. And I think if the sector is understood in terms of the role it's got to play, that we understand the issues and the challenges, but we understand the path to being able to address them well, and I think some of the foundations of that are being put in place, then actually we as an industry, as a sort of investor community, need to think differently and actually have a bit more confidence to say, right, okay, we're seeing the industry doing this, we see the adoption, development, alignment around these standards, we're seeing evidence that they're going to be implemented at mine sites, there's going to be transparency, there's going to be independent audit. On that kind of basis, I think you can reshape the way that we are looking into it and actually much more intentionally saying, okay, it needs to grow, and we actually potentially could crowdfund it in these ways as pension funds to enable it to do so. And I think that's part of the dialogue we want within the Commission.
Thank you. So we've one question over here, and then we'll take a question from the lady here. So this question...
Yes, so Julian Coyne from Convergio in Australia. So talking about the TikTok generation and shortened attention spans, I have a question around investment models and patient capital that understands mining. That's a thematic that's been coming through. Just by way of background, I'm a computer scientist. Strangely enough, I have a diploma of building and construction, and I work in downstream mineral.
Sorry, Julian, I'll have to ask you to hurry on because we're nearly out of time.
Yeah, okay.
Question?
So the question is, the models on public markets at the moment, where the time horizons are so short, there's a frustration with a lot of people around that. What are the different models within the public markets, but also outside of the public markets, that we might look at for better calibration of capital and knowledge on that capital that understands mining? If you'll indulge me for 1 second more, just in...
Sorry, you haven't got 1 second, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I'll have to take it at that.
But look, sorry.
Adam, if you start, and then there's a lady 3 rows back. Okay, go Adam.
Your question is
Sorry,
the
Julian.
question the Commission's going to be asking,
Yep.
and we're going to be coming out for a set of... we basically want to hear the views and ways in which we can do exactly what you're asking, because we want that dialogue. We want investors to take this moment, step back, informed by everybody, but actually to rethink and see where there are good models, but actually how could we do it differently.
Good, thank you. And the last question.
Yeah, very quickly. You mentioned, Adam, that the the Mining 2030 initiative is in favor of consolidation of standards, but you also mentioned sort of wanting to push things further. So I guess could you very quickly comment on whether the hope is that consolidated standard will help sort of rising tide will lift all boats in terms of good practice, or that the consolidated standards will define best practice and help pull out sort of top performers?
We need to define best practice so that we have clarity in terms of what we're aiming for. But we also got to recognise that a group of companies that operates to that doesn't actually ensure that this sector has the social licence it needs, has the confidence for us to change the way that we can invest into it. And I think that it's about ensuring that we define the best, we see the consolidate, we support the efforts to consolidate, but at the same time we ensure that we as finance really align behind a drive that the whole industry can work towards it. And I think that is the basis upon us having the conversation the gentleman was just asking about the way that we can approach this differently. That's the opportunity, and we've started to do that on tailings. I know we're out of time, but we've worked with ICMM companies. They've disclosed, they've responded to the global industry standard they were part of developing. But the 221 other companies that aren't their members, who of those are actually committing to the standard? We're engaging with those. We're expecting that they should also adopt that standard. It's not just a standard for ICMM, it's a standard for the whole industry. And can we do that on a range of issues? The opportunity is there, and I think there's a really positive future. And I think this is a moment to just step back and really try and create that.
And with that, Adam, I'm sorry we're out of time. Do you have one last key message for the audience? Pithy and brief. How's that?
Not me. But anyway, really would encourage people to engage with the Commission. There's an opportunity here to really take that moment. I know urgency is important on many of the things that we care about, but we can invest differently and play a very different role to the one that we currently have as the investor community, and I think the Commission presents an opportunity to do that.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, can we thank Adam Matthews for such a wonderful set of comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rory, for doing a great job at